So we have the story from Timcast. Vermont Supreme Court supports allowing illegal non-residents to vote. The court ruled the state's constitution does not require voters to be citizen to take part in local elections. By Hannah Claire Bermerloh.
Wow.
So what's going on?
Told you I was a writer for Timcast.com.
She's a writer. What's the story? You tell me.
So in 2018, Montpelier and another town whose name I can't actually pronounce, Winescu, I think it's pronounced, they passed ordinances saying anyone can vote in our municipal elections, so local elections. They can't vote at the state level, they can't vote at federal. But it means that you don't need to legally be a resident of Vermont, you don't need to legally be an American citizen to take part in these local elections. And they said, it's good, it encourages people to participate. If you're being represented by these local governments, you should get to vote. And it was in 2020, the state legislature approved they had to change their municipal charters to approve this, and it was sued. The RNC sued in April of 2021 and said this is crazy. Like, voters shouldn't just be able to come from anywhere, and it's a degradation to the integrity of elections. And it went through a couple different rulings, but basically the Supreme Court has upheld a ruling by a lower court saying the Vermont Constitution does say that you have to be an American citizen to vote in state elections, but does not place that requirement on municipal elections. So this makes these two cities in Vermont, there's a bunch in Maryland and New York City, examples of places where you don't have to be an American citizen to participate in local elections.
So I'm not a signatory on Phil's bank accounts, but I have the right to vote where that money goes. So I'm going to vote it to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it also says non-residents, so it's not just illegals, but non-residents.
People don't even live there?
No, so I mean, like, you could be from a different state and hop in there for a day and vote. Is that what they're saying?
They have not defined. I couldn't find any examples of how clearly they've defined what their residency policy is. Like, do you have an address? If I have a house out of state, but I have like a vacation house there, I can vote in their local election.
So imagine.
No question.
So what's the population of the smallest town in Vermont that's allowing this?
They're similar sizes. So they're considered, one of the outlets I was reading about this say that they're the most diverse cities in Vermont. One has 8,000 people. One has 7,000.
So imagine if they have they have an election and then like 14,000 people show up in a population of 7,000.
Yeah.
Yep. I guess that's technically possible now. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
They have opened the doors to just not requiring anything. I mean, this is similar to the states that don't want to require ID laws.
Is that still does that mean it's still a felony if you vote in two places?
I guess
it doesn't. In these towns, it doesn't seem like they care. I could not find any specific you can't be over here. You can whatever. It would be a felony if I am a person, a non-American citizen. I guess I live in this town. I decide to vote in the local election. If I then fill out the ballots for state or federal, it would be illegal, right? And so this is one of the objections that the RNC has raised. They're saying similar arguments came up when New York decided to pass this. They're saying how do you prevent voter fraud? Because we're going to have to print special ballots for people who only are voting in the local election, and that's difficult and it's more complicated. Now we have these other ballots and we have some ballot. If I give you a ballot, you're like, hey, I live here and I want to vote, and they're like, cool, just only fill out the local spot, and you don't understand, you check everything. Is that your fault?
This sounds like a terrible idea.
Right to jail, I guess.
Right to jail.
Right to jail.
Right to jail.
It sounds like an awful idea.
But representation. These people are
the joke I was making about your bank account is that if you allow non-citizens to vote, they will vote in the interests of the non-citizens and not the citizens. So if you live in a small town that has a gold mine in the center of it that is used to fund the medical care, people are going to be like, oh, I can vote here. I vote. I get the gold. I want to order pizza. Mm-hmm. They will. Why wouldn't they?
Well, not even non-citizens. I mean, if this is true, non-residents. I mean, to be fair, this is kind of how elections used to work. Like in 1876, what was the South Carolina, when it was going for Hayes or whatever, they had 101% turnout for eligible voters or whatever, and then in the counties along the border with Georgia, it was 2,600%. It was crazy.
Look, if it's 101, I go, well, look, then you've got an issue of check the voter rolls. How does this make sense? 2,600 is outright despot nonsense levels of funhouse world non-garbage.
Funhouse world non-garbage.
Yeah, at that point it's just okay, we're in Banana Republic territory at 2,600%.
Yeah.
Right.
There are some states that like specifically say no matter what, you have to be an American citizen to vote here. So like Ohio is one of them.
I feel like it should not be.
You shouldn't have to say it.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a controversial take to say the people that vote in the states should be residents of those states. They should be citizens of those states. They should be citizens of the United States of America.
Just wait. The next big thing will be nativist. They'll say you're a nativist. They already say it.
Well, yeah, there's already a lot of people that have demonized the term nationalist because of the association with National Socialist or whatever. If you are a nationalist, they associate you with fascist because fascism is always a nationalist kind of ideology.
They're gonna shift from white supremacist, bigot, or whatever to nativist at some point, and they're gonna be like. It's going to be 10, 20 years, and there's going to be a Supreme Court battle, and they're going to be like, these nativist bigots think that only people who live in some location can vote on the rules, and that makes no sense. Well, everyone gets to say we're all equal.
They're going to win people over by saying, like, if you live here and you're a green card holder, right? Like, I may not be super familiar with this, but, like, if you're not allowed to vote, but you do live in the country, right? You do have some sort of legal status here. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't you be able to participate in local elections, right? But then if they also don't require you to show any proof of residency or legal status, then there's no way to say who is actually partaking in these elections. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you don't really know what's influencing these cities and countries. I mean, Vermont is a beautiful place. Obviously, it's not the population of New York City. New York City, this becomes an even bigger issue. But to me, this feels like common sense, like you're saying, like American citizens should vote, but we know that the idea that you have to show ID when you go to vote is actually a controversial issue in a lot of places. They feel like you shouldn't have to.
I want to push back on that. It's not actually controversial. It is only controversial if you listen to politicians from the Democrats. The average American citizen does not believe that you should be allowed to vote if you're not a citizen of the state.
Sure, but they elect politicians who are okay with the policies.
Well,
so you're complicit in supporting it.
I have other issues with voting as well as this one, but the idea that it is popular in the United States, I don't think that's popular.
Did you confirm this non-resident part? You sure it's just not like non-citizen?
I went through the charter and I can't find like any indication that
they have to register and be on the voter rolls, right? Like, so you can't just like show up election day and be like, oh, I live in this neighboring county or something.
I mean, when I read it, last time I checked the actual charter change, they weren't requiring proof of ID, right? So like they are saying like you come, you vote, that's cool. They might have updated it in it initially passed in 2018, right? Mm. So they might have updated it since, but there is no discussion of proving residency in the Supreme Court case or in the original charter
So it's
change.
like resident honor system. Like you're supposed to be a resident, but we don't actually know if you are.
Yeah.
So you could argue if that's the case, they are technically allowing non-residents, although I think it'd be important we fact check that one.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there is no check, but I'm happy to fact check it.
Yeah, because like what are they actually saying? If there's no check, it may as well be anyone can vote if they feel like it.
They're saying that for locals elections, it doesn't matter, that the Vermont Constitution does not have a say over local elections. Vermont can regulate who gets to vote in state elections, and of course the federal government regulates who can vote in federal elections, but they're saying that the Vermont government doesn't have a say over who the municipalities are okay with voting.
No, it just sounds like the end of the country, We see it in San Francisco and New York. They've had the big move to allow non-citizens to vote. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, then what do you mean?
It doesn't, I don't understand why your average resident or citizen of the states are okay with it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I feel like mostly it's they don't realize. I really think most people don't pay very close attention to politics. Even the people that go and vote regularly don't pay nearly the attention to politics that people like us do. And so for the most part, they don't know what laws are being passed, in their local areas.
Yeah, and they always start with the safest thing too. I think they started initially with school boards. So they're like, well, if your kids, maybe they were born here, they're American citizens, they're going to school, and you might be an illegal parent. Like, you should be able to have a say in your kid's education. Like, they kind of like pull at your heartstrings that way, and then they expand it from there. And
incrementalism.
That's how it goes.
Yeah,
And then eventually, there's no country left.
yeah, it's 100%. That there's no part of me that doesn't believe that there are people motivated to change the fundamental structure of the United States. Like, and the people that say, oh no, there are no people that want to change the structure of the U.S., like, they're just not listening to the writers at Vox. The writers at Vox, like, there's Ian Millhauser wants to get rid of the whole Senate, right? There's no reason to have a Senate because something, right? Because there's popular election of the states. There's consistently talk from people on the left about expanding the Supreme Court. There's talk about getting rid of the Electoral College. These people do not like the structure of the government. They don't like a limited government. They don't like a government that puts the individual as sovereign. These are things that libertarians are constantly screaming about. Luke would be here, putting his hand up right along with me. These people want the federal government to have all the authority, and it's likely that they're in bed with international interests.
It's been a move for a really long time to strip away the local power.
Yeah.
The 17th Amendment, I think, was a huge mistake. I remember reading about this. I think it was Ben Sass who called for repealing it. This is the amendment that gave the right to elect a senator to the popular vote in the state. Mm-hmm. All that does is erode local elections and local involvement, and that was the most destructive thing to this. One of the most destructive things to this country, because it used to be, you voted in your local elections, you knew who your state reps were. They would then go. The state senators, I believe, would appoint a senator to go to the federal government. The idea was senators represent states, members of Congress represent the people.
Yep.
And there was a reason for the distinction. With the popular vote, now it's just do the same thing, and people don't even know who their local reps are, and they're like, I have no idea. What that did was made it impossible or extremely difficult to have a convention of states and actually work on the Constitution, amend it for the better or for worse. Because now people don't even know. I don't know. Who's your vote? Who's your local rep? Who's your state rep? Do you have any idea?
And one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating is, to your point, people don't know. And people are completely unaware of who represents them. They have no idea who their congressperson is. They have no idea who their senator is. They don't know who the senior senator is or the junior senator is, but these people feel extremely motivated every 4 years to go and vote. They don't know who they're voting for. They don't know why they're voting. They don't know the policies of the people that they're voting for. But every time some celebrity gets on TV and tells them, go vote, we got to get out there and vote for what? I have no idea. They're completely ignorant.
I just read a story today about how Seattle's running out of space for all the dead bodies from fentanyl.
That's gross.
And then I just got mad, and I'm like, why is it that all of the major cities are run by Democrats and are collapsing, are crime-ridden? There was a report, I think, the Washington Post, per capita crime, top 10 cities, all Democrat. Despite the fact that there was a couple Republican-run cities that were in the top population, didn't have crime, or the crime was substantially lower. Mm-hmm. Why is it? Is it because Republicans are fascists who go around arresting everybody? Is it because Democrats are extremists who release all the prisoners? What's
there may be some other correlating factors there, I think.
Like what?
Like what?
I mean, for example, of the top cities that you're mentioning, I think like most of them have like very heavy black populations, don't they? Like New Orleans, St.
Most cities
Louis,
do, though.
Detroit. No.
All the major cities?
Well, of the ones that have like, no, not exactly. I'm trying to think. Like, if like San Diego does, like, does San Diego have a super heavy black population?
I bet it's comparable.
How high is Phoenix, Arizona?
Let me look up. San Diego is. It's around 10%. Oh, it's not. Was it 5%?
What's the correlation?
What do you mean?
Like, you're saying these cities have.
So I mean, it's not like totally linear, but like again, these cities do have like, like the demographic that commits the highest amount of murders is like young black males. If you have a lot of that, that's probably going to be that's a factor. I mean, does it correlate more than having a Democrat mayor? Probably, I would say so, because there's cities with Democrat mayors that don't have exorbitantly high
San Diego's black population 6.6%. I don't think that aligns properly.
No, that's my point. It's like it's low.
I mean, it's like half of the national average, but I don't think.
Is it one of the top like homicide cities?
San Diego actually has lower crime, and for a while it was run by a Republican.
Well, what about not? Is it Democrat
So
city,
I mean, perhaps the argument is Democrats typically dominate in the black vote, and then Democrats have garbage policies which result in crime and releasing prisoners and things like that.
You can, like I heard you talking about this earlier, Tim. The fact that Rudy Giuliani went into New York City and cleaned it up, like that shows that
right.
No matter what the racial population in your city is, because New York is, it's as mixed as it gets. And if you can go and have the right policies and take New York City from, Skid Row to turning it into what is essentially Disney World now, or up until 5 years ago. It's policies can solve problems.
Oh, policy absolutely matters. And that's why I said it wasn't linear. I just said there's, other factors that probably correlate more. I mean, for example, New York City I believe it has more black people than like Chicago does, but Chicago's like way worse, obviously.
Right. That's why I don't know if it's the racial component that aligns with the crime.
No, I'm not saying that's the causal factor. I said it probably correlates more than having a Democrat mayor.
I disagree about that.
Yeah, it feels too surface level to me, right? If New York has more black people but substantially less gun violence than Chicago, I don't see why you would draw a correlation between the racial makeup of a city and be like, oh, San Diego's got a lower black population, that explains the crime rate. I'm like, no, it doesn't.
No, I'm saying
because New York has a higher black population.
It's about does it correlate more or less than having a Democrat mayor?
Yeah.
So when we covered this story, San Diego had a Republican mayor and crime was lower.
Okay.
New York has a lower black population than Chicago and lower crime than Chicago. So it's like, I don't see the racial connection. I understand the point at the surface level, I guess, if you were just to look at it and be like, oh, hey, look at these things.
I mean, so what are the states, for example, in the United States that have like the lowest homicide rates?
Lowest?
Yeah.
I don't know.
New Hampshire, Vermont, very, very low.
Idaho. Like, I mean, these
Idaho, there's nobody in Idaho,
rural states with very few people.
Yeah,
and there actually is a lot of violent crime in, say, West Virginia, where people like to say, like one thing they bring up is, these Democrat-run cities are really bad. And it's like, it is true. Like when you actually, like we covered this story a couple years ago, when you look at the top crime per capita, there's a correlation between cities run by Democrats with higher crime than cities run by Republicans. But red states in general do have very high rates of violent crime too.
Sure. I mean, you can always parse the statistics out in various ways. For example, the gun control organizations, they'll always take, they'll use gun deaths instead of gun homicides, and then that way they get the statistics that they
including
want to
suicide.
say, like, well, look, all the Republican states actually have higher rates of gun death than the Democrat states do. And then they look at states, they don't look at municipalities and how those are run. So, you can cherry pick it any which way you want.
Well, so here's a question: like, why are most major cities Democrat? No, hold on.
Yeah,
why are cities in general Democrat? In general, you go to West Virginia, go to any urban center, no matter how small it is, for some reason Democrat.
Yeah. I mean, this is a global phenomenon typically where like urban centers tend to be more left. Generally, I think when people congregate and they become like sort of concentrated in certain areas, they just think differently. They don't have the same day-to-day experience as people in more rural areas historically. Right. So
you interact with your neighbor a lot more, I find. You know what I mean? And because you see your neighbor all the time, you think more about your neighbor. I don't know if that's correct.
Wait, in urban areas or rural areas?
In urban areas, for sure. So maybe because of that, then you think when you hear something saying, oh, well, this is better for all of us, and hear the flowery language saying this is better for
you feel like
group.
people in urban areas interact with their neighbor more than like people in the suburbs.
I think that's completely right.
I don't know, but
I feel like they ignore them completely.
Yeah, totally. But I feel like they see them in person.
I think seeing someone and actually interacting with them is so different.
It's different.
Right?
Yeah,
we've talked to a certain degree with our neighbors out here. Mm-hmm. In New York, I lived above, below, side to side, and behind a person, and I never saw them, never talked to them, never interacted once.
Totally. I don't mean interact. I just mean like you see them in person. Like you see the people. I just mean you see the people, not that maybe you didn't interact, maybe you didn't see them that often. I'm just trying to speculate here and come up with something.
I think in cities, Luke Rudkowski made this video 10 years ago where he said, he goes on the subway all the time and there's millions of people coming in and out and they never once stop and talk to each other. So he decided one day just to talk to them and ask them, and then he asked them about conspiracy theories and stuff. It was kind of funny. But it's a good video. But he makes a good point. Yeah, I think in cities they don't talk to each other.
Yeah, I don't mean talk. I mean like literally see them.
I don't think that's the case. I can't tell you what my neighbors looked like. I can tell you what my neighbors out here look like.
Yeah,
like
true.
To a certain degree, like we have to talk to them. In the city, like I said, I was in an apartment above someone, below someone, had 2 apartments to the side, an apartment behind me. There was you got the door, and there's a stairwell, and then there's apartments all around it.
Totally.
And then there's one corner, and then behind. I can't tell you what they look like.
Yeah, true. I mean, you definitely have more community in small towns. Definitely, because like that's just reality. You have to rely on your community in a small town.
You're more likely to know who your cops are.
Right, exactly. I'm just trying to
Maybe
come up
that's
with some kind of reason.
Well, the one thing about cities is cities do attract people that want to be in cities. Like you hear the stories all the time about kids that leave their small town to go to the big city. But there are kids that are like, I don't want to go to the big city. I like it. Like you definitely have temperaments. People that have a temperament that is more conducive to wanting to live in an urban area versus someone that wants to live in a rural area. And then, of course, you do have a certain amount of people that would go to a city and be like, this is not for me, or vice versa.
Yeah,
but I think that the people that have that are inclined to go to cities and seek out that kind of lifestyle probably have the same inclination to be like, oh, I think that the government should provide services and et cetera, things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out like we asked, like why is the Democrat? Do you have a reason?
Maybe. Well, I'll tell you this: Democrat policy, I think, leads to higher crime rates.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just they're really good at scaring people into falling in line and joining the cult, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It would be
like your
hard-
video earlier about that, how it's just people that just go and vote because everyone tells them to go vote.
When you say, there's a meteorologist in New York, Fox News, got beaten up by a bunch of teenagers.
Yeah,
Right.
on Subway.
And the police said, we're not going to arrest or charge them because they were 15 and 17 or whatever.
Well, they said it would be a misdemeanor, and it's like, how is it a misdemeanor when this guy has like very visible marks from being brutally assaulted? That's
But
crazy.
because of their ages, they weren't charged. They were released to the parents. So these are the policies that Democrats enact. Look, I get it, man. I don't like cash bail. I think we need prison reform. I think we need more police accountability. But like just releasing criminals doesn't seem to make sense.
No, the options that have been brought, or the ideas that have been brought up to deal with the overcriminalization, maybe you call it, in the U.S., they're not good ideas. Like nobody, like the idea of getting rid of the police totally, that's a terrible idea because they're talking about replacing them with social workers that are completely and totally incapable of securing an area to try to deal with whatever's going on.
I think part of it is like this idea, like with the meteorologists, that, well, they're kids, we don't want to mark them with this record, and so we'll release them to their parents. Like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but like there are a lot of places, rural and not, that try to prevent children, especially from being unfairly punished for crimes that, like, if you were an adult and committed, would be pretty serious. So, like, I wrote this article last week about a 18-year-old who, at the age of 16, murdered 4 family members in cold blood, execution style, in West Virginia. And he will be eligible. He's been given life in prison, but because of a mercy rule in West Virginia, because he committed the crimes as a minor, he's eligible for parole in 15 years. So, is that because he deserves it? Is that because his crime is justified? Is that because, like, at 16 he doesn't understand the consequences? Like, you're saying these kids are 15 and 17. If you got caught shoplifting, I could see releasing to your parents. If you leave physical marks on someone, like, you can see that crime is more serious. But I think you sell it, like, if you're someone who lives in an area that is affected by crime, rural or not, being able to say, like, yeah, this person, when you get a criminal record at an early age and it follows you for the rest of life, you are basically on a downward spiral. Like, it's very difficult to overcome that. I think we understand why this stuff sells, but in practical application, it doesn't always serve the communities the best. Yeah. And to really understand the differences between major cities is hard because we don't have a great example of a direct comparison. A city that has high violence and is run by a Republican mayor, and a city that has high violence, similar population, run by a Democrat.
Yeah. Now, think about Montreal, for instance, because they're extremely racially and ethnically diverse, and they don't have nearly the level of crime of Chicago. Like, what is wrong with Chicago? True. I think it's the corruption. I think Chicago is a mob town. A lot of people are talking about the gangbangers and all that stuff, and like the South Side and the black community. And I'm like, yeah, no, I hear you, man, because I grew up down there. But you got to understand, the cops are crooked as they come. The cops would kidnap and torture people when I was like in my lifetime. You know what I mean? So it's like the crime exists. It just exists in different ways. Some's going on in Chicago where everybody's just kind of a dick. Like not everybody, obviously. You know, I love my Chicago family, but a lot of bad stuff. Like just think about all the early 1900s. Go to Midlothian Turnpike if you want to see where apparently that's where Capone dumped all the bodies. So you've had a history of corrupt government. The past few governors all going to prison. You have gang violence. Sums up with Chicago. I mean, Baltimore's really bad too. Don't get me wrong. Baltimore has a lot of crime. And so people want to look at the surface level and they see a racial component.
I assume there's a lot of crime or there's corruption in Baltimore, but it doesn't. I don't have the same association with corruption that I do with Chicago.
For sure.
You think of Chicago.
But you think the racial component plays like no role whatsoever? I mean, clearly we know that like
it's a surface level thing.
Well, you don't think there's like a big difference as far as like different groups the way they like commit homicide, like the amounts and like the rates?
I don't think the race is the issue.
I'm just saying like it's not about the race itself being the issue. It's that like the actual it's just the fact that this group has a higher rate of homicide.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you take into consideration different societal factors.
I mean, it's age
poverty
too.
levels.
It's age too. Like no one is saying like 70-year-old, black people are committing homicides at the same rate as like 15 or like 20-year-old Hispanic people. Like obviously not.
The challenge is you obviously have. I did a documentary. I talk about it periodically about Pruitt, Igoe, Ferguson, the riots. Why people are so angry, why there's crime the way it is. And what ends up happening is I'll have a conversation with someone and they'll say exactly what you did. They'll be like, oh, but young black men are the highest demographic when it comes to murder and stuff. And it's like in Chicago, it's very different in New York. New York has a much lower crime rate, though the crime still does exist.
But no, but that difference still exists there as well.
Right. And so what it is this is the challenge of racism, is that people will be like, I'm trying to figure out a pattern here, and I've noticed these two people look different. So I had a conversation with a guy about race realism, and he was mentioning, Somalians have low IQs. And I was like, Somalia, a country in decades of civil war and strife and famine and drought and constant, and then they would make the argument that even people who've left, and I'm like, right, dude, look, you go back 3 generations of a country being destroyed or people coming from a place where there's limited nutrients, you're going to have that go down the line, genetics, epigenetics, or whatever. I don't think that we're solving the problem by comparing a black guy from Haiti to a black guy from the South Bronx. I think there's genetic nature versus nurture components in everything. So there's probably something to be said for looking at an individual and making a determination. Like, if you were to say white people tend to be taller, I'd say, yeah, in Scandinavia. If you were to say Asian people tend to be shorter, I'd be like, right, we know these things exist. But I don't think when we're trying to get to the root of social problems, it's solved by being like, well, I happen to notice the racial components in crime. And I'm like, yeah, and I also noticed the voting patterns, and I also noticed they're releasing people from prisons in these cities. And so I kind of feel like I understand there's a nature versus nurture argument. I kind of think it's in the middle. I think if we're actually going to solve these problems, we need to just calmly say, I don't think the surface level racial component is actually a strong enough correlation or the cause of the problem. I think it could be solved if we didn't have lunatic leftist policy that was releasing people.
But why do you think it is that in New York City, for example, when it comes to the shootings and the murders, it's almost always every year over 93% black and Hispanic?
Oh man, this is a much longer conversation, which you'll probably have in the members only because it's going to take.
Sure.
Like we're 7 minutes past the doing the super chats, but I think a large component obviously has to do with why is it that Nigerian immigrants don't have these levels of crime and are very successful with higher salaries, but people born in America who are black, we notice these trends. I think it might have something to do with slavery, the history of racial politics in this country.
I think that you mentioned racial politics. I think that the whole idea of like young black people that study hard and they get told that they're acting white. I think there's a stigma that or at least I hear there's a stigma in the black community about black people that try to excel and they get told, oh, you're acting white and blah blah blah. So it's probably something we gotta
go super chats. Good. But we'll talk about this. We'll get into a lot more of the stuff in the members only show. Not to say that I wouldn't talk about it on YouTube. It's just that we're 7 minutes past when we like to start and do super chats and get to questions. So go to timcast.com, become a member, smash that like button, click that join us button at timcast.com, and then we'll carry on this conversation conversation, and we'll go into great detail as calmly and reasonably as we want. Of course, look, man, there's a lot of people who just don't care about any arguments, and I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of any argument that is tribal purely. You can't convince me. I won't listen to you. I say, okay, dude, then we're not having a conversation. Right. If you want to have a conversation, hang out with us at timcast.com. We may disagree, but that's the point. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.